Today's Talk About It Tuesday question is, how did you transition from being an employee to an entrepreneur and investor? What are three of the best lessons you learned that you can share to help make my transition easier? Ooh, good question. I haven't been asked this in a long time. I think for me, I started out like most people, having no clue that I would ever be a full-time entrepreneur and investor. I had a great job. I've always had good jobs. And I always had an entrepreneurial pursuit as a side hustle. And I always did a little investing, mainly with the idea of growing money for when I retire from earned income. So my primary source of income was always earned income with entrepreneurial stuff on the side, with investing on the side. And it took me a long time of working. Last job I was on, which I left in 2004, by the way, I had for 15 years. And it took me a long time to realize that although I had a good job, I had the status, I had all those things, I needed more for self-fulfillment, meaning I didn't believe I was stretching all of my capabilities and my creativity and everything that I could do to express myself, which was important to me. And of course, it doesn't mean your source of income has to provide that for you. You have to have some outlet for it, which I did, but I wanted to combine the two. And I also had this excitement of living or dying based on my efforts, meaning I didn't like the safety and security of going to work every day at the same time, getting paid, every 2 weeks, knowing exactly how I'm going to get paid. I felt bored. I felt trapped. I felt, again, like I wasn't using myself and my tools, my gifts, my talents to be able to decide my own fate. Now, it's easier emotionally to do if it's just you. But it wasn't just me. I was already married. I already had 3 children. So I also had to consider whatever decision I made was going to affect my family. And if it went well, of course, affect them in a positive way so that their lives are going to improve dramatically. But if it went badly, then I'm going to hurt them by not being able to provide, steady income, and maybe our lifestyle would change. So it was a hard decision to make, but year 13 of working on the last job I made a decision and I gave myself 2 years. And it took really all of those 2 years to put it together enough so that I could replace the income that I had, having an employment. So it took a lot of educating myself back then I left in 2004. There was no YouTube. There was wasn't much on the internet at that time. So I read a lot of books. I went to a lot of seminars. But the thing that really took me over the top was meeting the right people who were already doing the things that I wanted to do and creating those relationships where they could mentor me and pull me in and allow me to work together. So it had to be collaborative. So I guess lesson number 1 is you can't do it alone. So I had to have the support of my family, which is important because if your family's not in support of what you're doing, not going to happen. I had to have mentors who understood exactly what I was trying to do and were good at what they did so they can steer me around all the potholes and, navigate me in the right direction and lend me their resources. So their network became my network. Their expertise became my expertise. So they lent me, right, all the lessons that they had already learned and steered me towards, financing and, the right people and the right connections. So that was important. I think in terms of lessons, and I'll just leave that lesson aside that you can't do it alone. Most people make the mistake of trying to do it alone. You will never succeed alone. It's just impossible. The amount of time it would take for you to develop the right resources, the right skills, it's just, you don't have enough time in a life. So But let's get to some lessons. So, of course, and I'm going to, the obvious things, not a lesson. You definitely have to have goals. You definitely have to have a plan, right? So that's the easy stuff. I'm going to give you 3 lessons, and they're all really related to time. So the first thing I realized is that what you focus on is what will grow. And I think most people have not committed the time to really making it as an entrepreneur or an investor, because you haven't put in the time to learn everything that you need to learn. You haven't put in the time to lay the foundation and create an infrastructure for success. And so when I say time, what does that mean? Most people go to work for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. They travel for an hour or so either direction. They sleep for 8 hours. They have family time. They have chores. They do their workout. They do all these things. And on the weekend, they dedicate a couple of hours to trying to be successful as an entrepreneur. So you put in 40 hours a week for somebody else's entrepreneurial dream. And mind you, it's not only your 40 hours, it's other people's 40 hours. So if you multiply that people-wise and time-wise, there's a lot of people putting in a lot of time for somebody else's entrepreneurial pursuit, and you're putting in a couple of hours a week on yours and wondering why it's not going anywhere. So you have to make a real commitment to put in the time to do the foundational work. Make sure you're in a position to launch as an entrepreneur or as an investor. So you really have to. There's no work-life balance in the beginning, right? People, oh, work-life. No, it's totally lopsided. You have to commit an inordinate amount of time. I mean, tremendous amount of hours to learning the skills you have to learn, meeting the people you have to meet, creating the infrastructure for success, and making mistakes and doing the work and making mistakes and then learning from that and making mistakes and learning from that. So the time that you have to commit to it, once you decide this is what I want to do full time, you have to have a transitionary period. Like I said, I gave myself 2 years, but mind you, for decades prior, I was already dabbling in those things. So I had some knowledge and skills, but I had to get it up to par where I could, be in a position to do it full time. The second thing about time, lessons that I learned, is that humans are poor forecasters of time, meaning we overestimate what we can get done in a short amount of time, and we totally underestimate what we can get done in a long period of time. And so we end up giving up after a short period of time because we didn't make the progress we expected to make. It is a slow, drawn out process in the beginning, and you might not see significant gains for a while, and you cannot give up on it prematurely. The time is going to pass regardless, right? Time is going to pass regardless. So instead of giving up, you might as well use the time. And you have to think tiny incremental steps in the beginning, tiny incremental steps, because you don't know what you're doing. And it's going to take time, before you realize what you're doing. And it takes time to, again, lay foundation and infrastructure. It takes time to create systems. It creates time for things to grow, which leads me to the third thing about exponential growth or compounded growth, which is totally foreign if you have a job. Everything is linear when you have a job. I work this week, I make X amount of dollars. Next week, I make the same amount of dollars. Next week, I make the same. And then that adds up linearly. When you're investing and when you're an entrepreneur, things grow exponentially over time. And so the more you learn and the more you put in, it doesn't grow in a straight line, it grows out, right? So your efforts become easier and your outcomes become greater over time, but it only takes time, right? So in the beginning, it's going to be slow growth, and then it'll just take off. So understanding the time commitment in the beginning, which is going to be totally lopsided. Like I said, it's going to dominate all of your time in the beginning. Understanding that so managing your expectations in terms of how long things take. You're going to be impatient. You're going to want it to happen like yesterday. It's not going to happen like yesterday. It's going to take a long time. And the third thing is what time gives you. So that patience and that duration gives you compounded growth instead of linear growth. So if you stick to it, it'll look like nothing, boom, and an explosion, and it'll take off. And then things get a lot easier from there. So that is how I kind of transition. That is, those are the biggest lessons I learned really about time. Everything else, it's out there. Everybody knows you have to have a goal and you have to have plans, and those are the easy things, but it's really managing time and managing your expectations over time and understanding the value of time in terms of the way things grow. So I'd love to hear lessons that you've learned, if you've made that transition or in the process of transition, what things you're learning. But please like, share, subscribe, keep the questions coming, and I'll see you next Tuesday.